Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over a fun little trap in the King's Gambit, my favorite opening in all of chess, and that is the Nordwalde Trap. And it's in the King's Gambit decline line, so the King's Gambit starts out with e4, e5, and then f4. Accepted line would be just taking on f4, but there's a lot of different variations you could come up against in the decline lines. You have your d6. A lot of people play d5, the Falkberg counter gambit. You have just your normal knight to f6 here. You could see some crazy stuff in the King's Gambit. One of those is the Norwald, and that is queen to f6. Now, first we have to think about what they're actually trying to do. The immediate threat that they have is if they don't think that you know how to play against this, you could potentially play pawn takes on e5. That would be a huge mistake because then they can play queen to h4. This is their immediate threat because how do we stop this? Okay, if we play king e2, that just seems absolutely terrible. If we play g3, then we've completely lost because queen takes on e4 and then queen e2 and we've lost our rook on h1. So we're not going to play pawn takes on e5, obviously. We're going to be looking to get as much material involved into the game and attack our opponent. So knight to f3 is going to be our immediate response. But from here, they're also threatening the f4 pawn. So instead of taking with their pawn, they're going to take with their queen, and they have protection from their pawn. Now, it doesn't really matter too much they have protection because it's the queen. Hey, if we can trade off that queen with any other piece, that's going to be fine with us. But the queen is now attacking the pawn. We already looked at this e4 pawn is vulnerable because not only would we lose it, it's also the key square that's defending the king on e1. So we need to play knight to c3. Great development move. Also defends the pawn on e4. Best move from black is just to play bishop to b4, getting the dark square bishop involved into the game, as well as attacking the knight on c3. Many times, if you have to look at the setup and see, okay, what's the important square right now? It's currently e4. And then how's my opponent defending that? We're defending it, white is, with knight to c3. So always trying to attack the pieces that are defending the critical squares. But here's the thing. We do not care. Instead, we are going to continue with our mission of being extremely aggressive. That's why you play the King's Gambit. You're willing to give up material so that you have these strong attacks. And it starts with bishop to c4. And we say we don't care if you take our knight on c3, which is defending the e4 square. We're going to be looking to attack your weakest square, and that is f7 early on in the game. So yeah, if they want to take our knight on c3, which is the best move for black for sure. None of these are, well, I don't know if they're actually going to play that. If they're playing the Norwald with queen to f6, these are all the main lines that you'll see from black. But in this spot, we're not going to capture this bishop on c3. Instead, we're going to continue to develop and we're going to castle on the king side. So does a lot of things. One, it takes the king off the e1 square because that queen coming to e1 or to e4 is difficult to deal with. Second thing it does, you can see it lines up this rook. In the King's Gambit, what's always nice is once you castle, this rook is going to be in a semi-open file. And this F file is very dangerous because we also have our bishop on c4 attacking. So we have both our bishop, we have our rook, and then as soon as our knight moves, doesn't matter if it comes to g5 or e5, that's going to be hitting this f7 square as well. So a lot of threats on the board for white. Now, how does black respond from here? Well, really, they need to move their bishop back because if they don't, not only can we capture their bishop, but we're capturing it with tempo, meaning once we take the bishop, we're also opening up for the dark square bishop to attack their queen. So it makes sense to go ahead and move the bishop back so they don't lose a piece and allow us to gain a tempo. So bishop to b4. But we're not looking to play c3. We don't care about the fact that we gave up a knight on c3. That's not our aim here. We're trying to be as aggressive as possible. And so that is the move d4, opening up with our dark square bishop to now attack the queen on f4. Now we're going to be looking at two variations once we attack the queen. One is just if they take on e4, and the other is if they don't take and maybe they play queen to g4. They don't have a lot of options. If you can kind of look on the board state, they can't come to g5 or h6 because the bishop is just attacking these dark squares. They can't come to f5 and because of our pawn, and they can't come over here to h4 because of our knight. And things get pretty tricky if they try to stay on this f file because of our rook on f1. So first thing we're going to look at is queen takes on e4. Now, as soon as they do this, we are all in. They've already fallen for the trap just by playing normal moves in the opening, which is great. Because sometimes you watch a video or you see a trap and you say, oh, they would never do that. Or if they don't fall for this trap, then we're in a tough spot. That's not the case here in the Nordwalde Trap. They're playing very logical moves. And for the most part, across the board, they're playing the main line. But they just come into a tough spot. It's not the best defense that black has against the King's Gambit, but you just need to know how to attack it properly. So in this spot, we're going to take on f7 with our bishop. Now, it's really bad if they take with their king. Bad for black. It's very good for white because we just have the move knight g5. You can see we're forking the queen. So as soon as the king moves, we are going to capture the queen on e4. Definitely not going to be a good thing. So once we take with our bishop on f7, they really need to play d8. You don't want to keep it on this f file. Our rook on f1 is just going to absolutely dominate. Remember, we gave up the knight on c3. Don't even care. We're going to get that back with some interest. So king to d8, we're going to capture on g8, rook takes, and then we're going to get our dark square bishop involved into the game. You can see we're so much better at getting all of our pieces working together. Their king completely in the middle, just getting attacked. The queen here on e4, it finally got to the square it wanted to. It's not doing a whole lot. The bishop on b4, it's not really working with any other piece, and the rook on g8 is just hanging out. Okay, so how do they continue from here? It seems pretty logical to bring the bishop back. If they can just exchange off some material, that feels like a win. But after we take, we can now come up knight to e5. And this is a spot that there's a lot of ways that black can continue. I'm going to go over two of them and just show you the fact that black is completely lost in this position. One is if they look at this and say, okay, let's go ahead and attack the knight. One would be to play pawn to d6. And then white has the move rook to e1. So now the queen's under attack, and they don't have a lot of good squares. If they move pretty much anywhere, you know, they can't come up to g6, but if they move anywhere, now we have a discovered attack once we move our knight, a discovered check even, which is even better. So to give you one example, let's say they play queen to f5. They want to keep it centrally located as much as possible, but now we can just play knight to c6. Okay, discovered check here, attacking the king. Now, where does the king really go to? Don't have a lot of good options. Maybe king to d7, attacking the knight. But you can see that we control the e file with our rook. So now we have moves like knight to e7. This is forking the queen and the rook. All things good for white, all things bad for black. So that's definitely not going to work. Now, if we come back and say, what if they don't play pawn to d6? What if they try to attack this knight with their knight? Okay, well, now we can actually just take pretty freely here. And they don't have a lot of great options as far as how they would respond. Because, you know, if they just take with their pawn on c6, well, then we have rook to e1, and their queen's going to fall. Because we now control this e file. They can't move their queen. So yeah, there's going to be exchange here, and white's in a pretty easy, comfortable spot here. They could decide, well, what if we just take the knight with our queen? But this isn't going to work as well either because of the move queen to h5. And it looks a little weird. You're like, well, how does this actually help? You have to keep in mind that they can't really move. Well, one of the threats is we have queen to e5. Another threat that we have is rook to f7. being defended by the queen. And we can also get our other rook involved into the game. So they can't play anything with their queen on the e file because, queen to e6, and then we just have rook to e1, and they're going to lose the queen. Okay, so that's not an option for them. So maybe they decide, let's not move our queen at all. Well, what if you just play pawn to d5? This opens up for our bishop to get involved into the game, but then we have rook to f7, and you can start to see the threats that we have here. Queen or king back to d8, queen to g5. Maybe they come over with their queen here, but then our rook takes, pawn takes, and then we take their queen. There's really just no escape from them. It's just going to go completely bad from their standpoint. Okay, so let's come back to the very beginning. We looked at if their queen takes on e4 and the different variations you could see. Now let's look at what happens if they play queen to g4 in this spot. So similar to if they took on e4, as soon as they play queen to g4, we're going to take the pawn on f7. Now, we already looked at why it's bad if they take here, because we could play knight to e5, we're forking the queen, and that's going to be a pretty easy game for white. Now, if they play king to d8, the slight difference in the variation is we're going to play h3. This is essentially forcing their hand and to say, how do you want to respond? Now, if they play queen to e4, this is going down the same path that we've seen before, because now we just take on g8, they take with their rook, we play bishop to g5, and you've seen this variation before. Now, if they don't take on e4, maybe they decide to play queen to g3. Okay, well now we're still going to take on g8. Now, we've always looked at what happens if the rook takes on g8. So let's look at one other way they could try to continue in some of these variations. And I'm showing it in this example, but it'll apply in the others as well. They played knight to c6. Okay, well, now we're just going to keep going with the same game plan, bishop to g5. You can see all of our pieces playing so well together. This knight is defending the bishop. You can see the rook is controlling this entire f file. Our queen can get involved into the game, especially when the knight moves. We have some very, very powerful attacks with the queen coming to g4 and h5 at any given time. So now we're attacking the king on d8. So more than likely, bishop comes back to e7. But now we have the move knight to e5, capturing that pawn here. And if you look at it, how will they continue? Okay, well, if they take our bishop, which is the immediate threat that's pinning down the bishop to the king, if they take here, well, now we can come up knight to f7, check, and forking the rook on h8. So king to e7, and we just capture on h8. Now, if we come back and say, what if they don't take the bishop on g5? What if they just try to take our knight? Okay, they're still protected from this bishop, but this is actually going to be checkmate. So they lose with rook to f8. So you can see all the different landmines at the very beginning. They thought they were pretty cute because we tried the King's Gambit and they said, hey, we have the Nordwalde, and this is our way that we're going to try to attack you because we don't know if you're actually a King's Gambit professional. And we have other things in store for them because we know exactly how to attack it now with the Nordwalde Trap. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I love doing videos on the King's Gambit because I think in chess, it's all about finding your favorite openings and then studying everything about those. For me, that's the King's Gambit at the top of the list. I've tried to go through pretty much all the variations so that when I play, I feel extremely comfortable. It doesn't matter if it's an accepted game, decline line, does not matter. I love all the traps that are involved, extremely aggressive, which fits my personality. So hopefully if you are a King's Gambit fan as well, if you ever run into this, you'll know exactly how to counter it. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.